who's with Lazear, and he's going to tell us about the magic that ESOPs bring to the table. Shawn?
Ben, thank you. Well, it's great to see everybody. Thank you very much. It's nice to look out and see a bunch of familiar faces. For those that I don't know, Shawn Ely with Lazear Capital Partners out of Columbus. If you set your expectations really low, I might exceed them. I would like to congratulate Tom Ralston. I know he received an award last night presented by Tim Dimoff. Appreciate you guys both being here this morning early. And for those of you that made it through, I guess it pretty much quit snowing, but 7:30 on a snowy Friday morning. So let's jump into it. I do want it to be interactive. I'm going to teach you how to bake a souffle in 40 minutes. So, there's going to be some holes, but as you have questions, please ask them, and we will get to an open Q&A sort of at the end. So, a quick overview on the firm. Primarily ESOP Advisory. We do sell-side engagements. Last year, as a data point, we sold 43 companies across the country. 40 of the 43 were ESOPs. So it is, the bulk of what we do. But the firm was founded in 1999 down in Columbus, originally doing sell-side advisory. So it's certainly the core of what we do, and ESOP is sort of a tangent of that traditional sell-side. The firm, as I said, based in Columbus with 55 professionals and offices across the country. I joined 8 years ago, and I was employee 8. So we've grown a lot. Transaction volumes increased as has our footprint and our staffing, and working with family-owned, founder-owned businesses across the country. So this probably isn't a shock to you to know I'm just a pretty face. Okay, it's really my team down in Columbus. Why you guys laugh when I say should I feel worried about that? But if you think I'm bad, you should see these guys down in Columbus. Hideous. They are really bad. But what they have going for them is they're really, really smart. Okay? And so the key to what we do and our ability to deliver great outcomes for our clients is driven by the team that we've assembled. And I had nothing to do with it. I think we have 7 attorneys now. 5 of those attorneys are tax attorneys. Former E&Y, PwC, KPMG, tax professionals that have joined. We've got 15 plus CPAs, we have ABVs, we have CFAs, we have 10 or 12 former commercial bankers, and on and on. And the reason I tell you that, the reason it's important is that as we're doing an ESOP transaction for our clients, we're going to draw on all of these expertise and professions. And I want to be clear, we don't do accounting work. We don't draft legal documents. We don't issue tax opinions. We just have that knowledge in-house, and we work very collaboratively with our clients' professionals, their outside professionals, to get to the right answer. We want to make sure that as we're sitting around the table and drafting the transaction, that everybody's nodding their heads that, yes, we're comfortable, yes, this works. It's a very collaborative process. So working with clients, though, we really have to understand their goals, and I want to talk about that a lot with respect to ESOPs. It's not the right answer for everybody. I'm not that guy that's going to tell you, oh, every company in the world should be an ESOP. Not at all. It really depends on what the owner's trying to achieve. So we work very hard to understand the client's goals, and we craft a unique, individualized, custom plan to achieve their goals, right? So it's a deep technical expertise that I just touched on with my colleagues. We combine it with creative energy. We think that yields outstanding results for our clients. So, look, if you sit through an investment banking presentation, I got to show you logos. I'd probably lose my license if I don't, so here we are. Bunch of companies across the country, primarily Midwest, I think on this slide. Diverse industries. I've checked that box so we can move on. So what is an ESOP? I get that question a lot. Employee stock ownership plan. It's not an employee stock option plan, as many will say. It's an ownership, there's like a couple different ways to think about an ESOP. One, it's an ownership transition tool, okay? So You have an ESOP trust that becomes a single shareholder. It creates an ownership-minded culture in the people. It's an employee retirement plan, qualified ERISA-governed plan. So ultimately, it looks, smells, and feels a lot like a 401k plan. There's a lot of similarities to it. It's a qualified retirement plan where you have an ESOP trustee acting as a plan fiduciary. And that's important. We'll talk about that a bit later. And ultimately, the company buys out employees when they retire or leave the company. So that's how employees actually get liquid. And then finally, it's a highly tax-efficient leveraged buyout. Now, sometimes you say leveraged buyout, and that can have negative connotations in it, depending on your perspective. But you have, as a seller, the ability to defer and ultimately eliminate capital gains taxes. And the company itself becomes a tax-free entity. An S-Corp ESOP does not pay federal or state income taxes. Think about what that does for your cash flow, right? And we'll talk about that. But that's sort of a high level. Some of the myths, you guys may have these, you may have others. I hear them a lot. First is I won't get a fair or competitive price. You don't want to sell to an ESOP, you're not going to get a competitive price. I will tell you, I was talking to somebody earlier. My colleague down in Dallas, just closed a transaction in October, sold a mechanical contractor for $800 million as an ESOP. So he got a very nice price. And that owner did not pay capital gains taxes. So Texas doesn't have a state capital gains tax. He could have sold to a third-party private equity buyer for $1 billion and netted the same number by selling $800 million because you got a 20% federal capital gains rate. $200 million in capital gains taxes if you sold to a third party. So it's powerful, and the ability to get a fair competitive price is easy. I can do that in my sleep because by law, ESOPs are permitted to pay fair market value. Okay? What ESOPs can't do is pay that last dollar market clearing premium that you might, and I emphasize might, achieve in an auction process. We're all involved at some level in the deal process, and yes, if squeezing out every last dime is a driving factor, then the only way to know that and sleep well at night is run an auction, and the market will tell you what that last dollar price is. As long as you're a fair market seller, ESOPs can do that all day long. After-tax proceeds are really what matter. Seller-owned real estate is protected. I'll just tease that by saying the ESOP is happy to buy the real estate and then appraise fair market value or lease it on fair market rent basis. And then the ESOP actually pays all the closing costs and deal fees. They don't come out of your pocket. They reduce the cash you get at closing, they're added to the seller note and paid back to you. So pretty powerful. Many times I hear folks say, oh my God, it takes forever to get the seller note repaid. I gotta wait 10 years. The reality is you're gonna receive about 30% in cash at closing. Whatever isn't paid in cash is on a seller note. That seller note is typically paid in 4 to 6 years. Depends upon the performance of the company, clearly. And it's priced at, again, typically 12%. So it's not a bad option in terms of return. And then finally, there's this notion of I have to report to a trustee, right? Many of our clients are folks that have never reported to anybody. It's been a family business or they're the founder, 40 years and never reporting to anybody. The notion of having to answer to a trustee is off-putting to them. Well, the reality is the trustee has no interest, inclination, or ability to run your business. They are a planned fiduciary at the trust level. They're going to make sure you don't pay your brother-in-law $500,000, that you don't buy a boat to entertain clients, but other than that, they're not involved in your business, and they don't sit on the board. And employees do not get any more powers or rights as employee owners. They can't walk in your office and demand a new car or a bonus or raise. It doesn't work like that. You still have the same reporting structures that existed beforehand. So how does it work? High level, I'm going to walk you through that. An owner will sell their shares to a trust. The employees are the beneficiaries of that trust. You can sell from 0 to 100%. The tax advantages kick in at 30%, so most tend to be a 30% minimum. The trust will own and hold all those shares, all right? And then again, the employees are beneficiaries of the shares. The company will borrow money from a bank based on market terms and conditions, nothing unique about an ESOP loan versus a regular loan. And by the way, if you're debt averse and you don't want to take on bank debt, which 2 of my last 4 clients have done seller financing for the entire amount, you can certainly do that, but then you don't get any cash at closing potentially. The company will lend the money to the trust. The trust uses this cash to pay about 30% of the value of that business to the seller. Whatever isn't paid in cash goes on a seller note. Pretty simple structure, really. It's senior debt, seller note. The seller note is just a shock absorber in the capital structure, if you will. It flexes. Senior debt, regardless of the purchase price, tends to be, you know, and there's bankers in the room, 1.5 to maybe 2.5 times cash flow. Whatever, if it's a 7 times deal, then you know, your multiple of seller note is the difference. Now the shares, remember, are in the trust, and these shares get allocated to qualified employees each year. So it's an annual allocation of shares. Typically over 30 to 70 years. It's a long period, but you've got 100% of the shares, assuming 100% sale, 100% of those shares sit in the trust, and they're allocated every year. Qualified, same thing to be a participant in the 401k plan. You have to be a qualified employee, right? You define that in the plan documents. It's 21 years of age, 1,000 hours, you know, whatever you establish. Employees do not pay a dime for these shares. Okay, there is no investment by the employees. The shares are granted to them each year, and they're subject to a vesting schedule, just like a 401k. You see a lot of similarities. Pay and benefits do not change. Pay doesn't go down, benefits aren't altered, there is no investment. And when they retire or leave the company ultimately buys those shares back from the employees at a fair market value. And the fair market value is determined by an independent appraiser. Every year there's an updated valuation that's done. That valuation provides the basis for the statement that the employees will get once a year that says, here's how many shares you have, here's your vested balance, here's the dollar amount. And then the seller note is paid out over time from the tax-free cash of the business. And periodic refinances on the seller note. Bankers that embrace ESOP lending understand the notion that the company will typically come back to the bank periodically to do refinances. As they pay that debt down out of the tax-free cash flows, the bank says, hey, let's reload this. They add some more cash to the term loan. That cash goes to pay down the seller note. Now I've got a slide on that as well. Any questions thus far? Nobody's sleeping, which is good. All right. As I said, typically paid off in 4 to 6 years. And here's what's great, depending on your perspective. As a seller, you're going to hold this seller note. You're earning 12%, right? If the company has a flat year, misses projections, COVID hits, bird flu's next, whatever it is, all it means is your seller note is going to be pushed out a little further. You're still making 12%, which, one might argue isn't a horrible outcome. How's an ESOP valued? So this gets to that, well, we're not going to get a fair price. ESOPs aren't going to pay. Our job is to represent the sellers. We're selling that business, right? Just like we would with any third-party sale. We negotiate not only the price, but the typical deal terms with the trustee and their valuation firm. The trustee will engage a valuation firm to represent them and help negotiate value. It's an arm's length transaction. So when I'm doing an ESOP transaction, instead of calling 300 of my closest private equity friends and 300 strategic buyers. It's a rifle shot discussion with the trustee. By law, remember, an ESOP can pay that fair market value. The trustee's biggest concern is that they don't exceed, again, this notion of fair market value. I think we all appreciate fair market value is a range. It is not a scientifically derived point. So my job is to, just like I do in third-party sales, advocate for value, right? Give them every data point, anecdote, story, fact to help push that value up and to the right. So as long as we don't exceed fair market value, we get a deal done. Well, that's interesting.
Shawn, who is the trustee?
It is a professional, it's a niche industry.
Oh, it's just a guy.
It ranges, like law firms, they range from, smaller law firms to Jones Day and everything in between. Trustees are the same, actually. There's institutional trustees down to individual trustees. ESOP's considered a financial buyer. Again, to the point, an ESOP cannot pay that market clearing premium that you might achieve out of a strategic buyer that can cut costs. And fair market value is determined by the negotiation, and it's based on the same things that valuation is when you sell to a third party, DCF and market-based multiples, right? So if a range, we all understand valuation ranges, maybe it's 6 to 8 times. Hey, Jeff. If it's 6 to 8 times in this industry, given this size, I'm probably going to be able to deliver a 7.25. I probably won't be at the very, very top end of the range, but as long as we're in that market-based terms and the DCF flows, that's how we establish a value. So it is very much a market-based valuation. And our job is to again, achieve that full and fair value. And I think when you consider the tax advantages, in many, many cases, an ESOP can be the transaction that actually maximizes the proceeds for the seller. Now, some of it comes over time, right? We're going to touch on that. And when you consider seller note interest and warrants on top of that, it only adds to the value. So I've teased a couple of the tax incentives. Congress is trying to encourage business owners. As part of ERISA, 1974, ESOPs were formally established, and it was to encourage owners and families to sell to an ESOP. You can sell on a tax-deferred, ultimately tax-free basis. By not paying capital gains taxes, that increases the proceeds by about 1/3. Okay, if you do in Ohio, 25%. If you're in the Republic of California, you have the privilege of living and owning a business there, 33.3%. I closed a transaction in Oregon for a family-owned sawmill. State tax there is 9.9%. It's taxes eat up a lot of your gain if you're in those high-tax states. And the 100% S-Corp ESOP does not pay federal or state income taxes. Think about the power of that. Today, S-Corps are typically in Ohio, where you're going to distribute 40 or 45% of pre-tax earnings just so the shareholders can turn around and pay their quarterly tax bill. So if you're $1 million pre-tax and you distribute $400,000 to the shareholders, the company's left with $600,000, right? You pay down debt, you reinvest, CapEx, okay. If you're an ESOP, your $1 million pre-tax is $1 million post-tax. Two equal companies, sales, gross profit, operating profit, pre-tax profit, but one's an ESOP, one's not. Who are you going to bet on? All right, I agree.
Shawn, is there a minimum size of a deal that you really could do an ESOP with? There's transaction costs and everything to it. So
indeed.
what's the minimum?
We sort of look at 10 million of enterprise value. However you get there, if it's 2 million of EBITDA and you're a 5 multiple kind of market, something like that, you can do a very basic ESOP for smaller companies. You're just not going to get all the bells and whistles. You're going to get the Yugo, not the Cadillac kind of thing. Yugo's still made? I don't even know. I'm dating myself, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Kias are nice. All right, why? Why do these benefits exist? Why is Congress doing this? Look, I think everybody understands the notion most Americans aren't saving enough for retirement. It's a sad fact. 40% retire only with Social Security. Social Security was never intended to fund your retirement. It was a safety net, right? 40% of Americans are retiring only on Social Security. 50 years ago, in 1974, when Congress was establishing ERISA, the discussion then, as it is today, was about income inequality and the haves and have-nots, right? Sadly, we're still having that conversation today. And they set up 401ks as well as ESOPs to help support Americans' retirements. This is just another leg of that retirement stool. A study shows 65% of Americans don't have enough retirement savings when they consider the entire net worth. The left appreciates the sharing of the wealth, that wealth-producing asset, which is the company, with the working class. And the right, of course, embraces the tax returns, or the tax savings. So what's neat about it is I tell folks, because we just had a big election, you may be aware, right? People say, well, we've got a new administration. Is that good or bad? I said, actually, it doesn't really affect us either way, because at the end of the day, any piece of legislation that's been introduced over the last 30 years regarding ESOPs has been co-sponsored by Democrat and Republican with broad bipartisan support. It tends to be one of the very few things Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz can agree on. Okay, who's going to walk into Congress and pound the table and say, I am against employee ownership? It is not right for our country. Nobody, right? So it's got great support across the board. So studies will show, and this was the National Center for Employee Ownership has sponsored a bunch of academic peer-reviewed studies that show ESOP companies, on average, outperform their peers on any measure that you want to track: sales, profitability, margin, productivity, employee engagement, customer satisfaction. Anything that you want to measure at an ESOP company, on average, they outperform their peer group. Now, are there great, high-performing non-ESOP companies? Absolutely, right? But they've understood and embraced culture and progressive management. You see an increase typically in productivity, half as likely to go out of business for any reason, and the ability to attract and retain, 4 times more effective. I don't know how you measure that, but think about it, right? As a company, you are an ESOP and your competitor is not, and you're both targeting the same candidate for a position. So you're offering the same package, pay, benefits, they're about the same, right? But you're an ESOP and they're not. Does that candidate, they flip a coin, right? Or is it kind of obvious, I'm going to go where I get this free option, right? I don't pay anything for my shares. And if they're knowledgeable, they recognize that ESOP companies tend to have a great culture, very positive, supportive, sort of collaborative culture. That's an attractive place to go. Studies also show employees much less likely to walk across the street for an extra 50 cents or $1 an hour when they have an ESOP benefit. So it's powerful on both sides from the HR perspective. And for the employees, I mean, it's nothing but good. Worst case scenario for that employee, worst case, the shares are worth nothing. Well, okay, that sucks, but you didn't put any money in, right? So that's your worst case scenario. If you retire and you get $50,000, it's $50,000 that you didn't have and you didn't pay for. It's a bonus money. Higher wages and certainly 2.2 times greater retirement assets. So it's only good for employees. I'm not going to touch on each of these, but what I would suggest is initially when I talk to folks, their perception is, well, I'm going to sell my company. what else other than price should matter? Right? I'm selling, I want to get the most. Yes, that's certainly a valid consideration, but do you care about the headline value? Do you care about what you put in your pocket? And you can give all to our fine professionals here to invest for you, right? So taxes matter. A sale to a third party, depending on whether it's an asset or stock, and you've got recapture or not, 25 to 30% in Ohio. Again, in some of these other states, much higher. Sale to an ESOP, between 0 and 25%, because you're selling stocks, so you don't have any recapture. Liquidity, it's fixed. You don't have any earnout, so you don't have to hire Ben to litigate for you on the earnout provisions. Highly predictable in an ESOP process. I can tell you sort of on a week-by-week basis what to expect, what's going to happen. For those of you that are involved with third-party sales, sometimes they're unpredictable. Fair to say, right? Okay. Disruption operations. Depending on the size of the auction process you run, it can be significant. And even when you select a single buyer, then it's quality of earnings time and due diligence time, and things can get, depending on the buyer and their approach, can be pretty disruptive. An ESOP, one meeting, and the due diligence is confirmatory in nature, not the colonoscopy that sometimes happens with third-party buyers. Employee impact. Sale to a third party could be good. Certainly, you know, a lot of times it's not, so we say unknown. I would argue it's only positive in an ESOP scenario. Likelihood of closing, I'm going to knock on wood, 100% of our deals close. As long as the seller is comfortable with the number that we convey to them up front when we get engaged, we will close at or above that number. Third-party sales, you know, we get, as a data point, so we get 10, 15% of our transactions each year come to us out of busted auctions, right? Situations where that company had hired another investment banker to take them to the market, and they were, you know, rose-colored glasses of oh, it's going to be great, best thing, the private equity's throwing money at us. And they get into the process, and again, depending on who they're partnering with, you got to retrade. Oops, you know, EBITDA's not quite that number. Oh, there's another one. Somewhere in that process, the owner's like, I'm done with you. You know, you and the horse you rode in on can head right out the door. I don't want to work with you. I don't want my employees to be partners with you. I don't like you. And they walk away. They still haven't addressed their liquidity or their succession planning needs, right? They come to us, and now they're skeptical, but we get engaged, and we're going down the path. Happens the same way every time. I'll call that owner, and they answer the phone. What is it? Hey, just confirming our meeting on Tuesday. Oh, is that it? Yeah, that's it. Oh, okay. They're jumpy. They're like a cat that got their tail stepped on. We get to the closing. We're at or above the valuation we told them. There's more cash than we told them, and they're incredulous. They can't believe we they were always thinking Shawn and Lazear's full of it. They're never going to do it. And we do, because it's very controllable. And the refrain that we hear consistently is, I wish I had known about this option, the ESOP, before I lost 9 months of my life to that blankety blank, 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 blank process. So it's important. And then post-closing involvement. You sell to a third party, they always tell you, you know, we want you here, you know, we're going to back you, you're going to run this for us. But at the end of the day, they make that call. It's the new owner. You have a new owner. You have a new partner. They're calling the shots. In an ESOP, an owner decides how long they stick around, what role they play. Now, they have a big seller note, so this is going to shock you guys. Many business owners are control freaks, right? I know, shocking. They want to be running the business while that seller note's getting repaid, okay? And so many will stick around. They'll use that period of time that they're still involved with the business. A lot of times they'll be coaching up their people, they'll be mentoring their people, they'll become cheerleaders, getting ready to hand that business off to the next level of management ultimately. But they decide, the seller decides. Third parties, how many of us know people that sold to private equity to a strategic, and 6 months later they had a meeting and it was, you know, this has been great what we're doing here, but we're going to go a different direction. What do you mean? Yeah, pack your stuff and and go, right? It's heartbreaking for these folks. I also know a story of a gentleman walked away from a $10 million earnout. It required him to be there 3 years. He lasted 6 months and was, I can't stand this. This is just, now, he got paid $200 million, so he was, he was okay. But still, how pissed off do you have to be to walk away from $10 million? Pretty pissed off, right? Anyway, ESOP transaction teams. Who's part of this transaction that's getting done? So as Lazear, we're the investment banking advisor. We sit in the middle. We're representing our client. The sell side includes the selling shareholders as our direct and actual client, incorporating key employees as part of that process, working with company counsel, their outside accounting firm, their third-party administrator or a TPA, and their wealth advisors, because all those folks are critical to crafting the right outcome for that client. And so, again, we work very collaboratively with those folks. On the buy side, and the sell side may be obvious, the buy side, okay, so we've got a trustee, because every trust that's established has to have a trustee. To Ben's question earlier, that's what they do. It's a little niche industry. Trustee will hire counsel. They'll hire a valuation firm to help advise them and negotiate with us in terms of value, and any lenders and lenders counsel. I teased it earlier. You don't have to use senior debt if you don't want. I've had a number of clients that have not. Those folks typically have built cash on the balance sheet, and they'll distribute that, and they'll use that for their liquidity. The bank loan up front provides liquidity if you don't have cash. And then our job, as I said from the beginning, is to first identify the goals of the seller, right? And then advocate for value. That's what we're doing. We're driving that value for our client. We're working with the outside professionals on the tax and financial structuring. We're negotiating the deal terms. We're going out to the banking community to raise that senior debt piece, and then ultimately manage the deal process to a successful closing. From the time we get engaged to closing, we talk typically in a 4-month time frame. I've got one going right now down in Cincinnati that will be sort of just over 3 months. Owners got their stuff together, the numbers are clean, it's moving very quickly. And others certainly have taken longer, depending on availability. Owners decide they want to sell, and then we're trying to schedule meetings. I'm going to be in Europe for 30 days. Okay, we'll put it on pause for 30 days and get to it when you're back. Tax benefits, we touched on a couple. We'll revisit. You have the ability to avoid capital gains taxes by making a Section 1042 election. Just part of the tax code. If you're familiar with 1031 exchanges in real estate, well, the 1042, it's 11 points better than the 1031. Thank you for the chuckles. That's nice. It's a bad tax joke. It's just part of the tax code, different section. As I said, the 100% S Corp ESOP is exempt from federal and state income taxes, which is just powerful. And what do you do with this excess cash flow? Typically 3 things. You hammer the debt down, you reinvest in the company, and you take a couple dollars every year and you set it aside because you're funding the ultimate repurchase obligation for employees that retire down the road. Now, I've heard horror stories isn't maybe the right word, but stories of, this ESOP had to sell because they couldn't afford the repurchase obligation. Well, my response is, what the ESOP failed to do was plan. They did not start setting aside. It's just like saving for retirement, your kid's education. If you start early, a couple shekels in the pot early, you're probably in a good spot. If you stick your head in the sand and 30 years later, pick your head up, you're going to have a problem. Let the power of compounding and time help you with that. And today, again, the transactions are becoming more professional and getting done in a better fashion from not only the investment banking side, but the banking side, the trustee side. So banks and trustees are now requiring a repurchase obligation study to be done, within 3 years of closing, and then every 2 or 3 years thereafter, just to keep the board up to speed on what that starts to look like, so that you're planning for it and you're not surprised by it. Early on, the repurchase obligation is really small, but over time, just like your house, as you pay your mortgage down, you create equity value. And if the house appreciates, you also create equity value. Same thing in the business, right? As you pay your debt down, you're creating equity value. And as you're growing EBITDA, the value increases. But early on, you don't have a lot. And once you pay off that debt, though, it gets supercharged. We can also create a pre-closing contribution deduction. I had a client in Indianapolis that we ended up generating a $1.2 million tax savings for them on their prior year tax return that they hadn't filed yet. It wasn't final, because we made a pre-closing contribution to the plan that was cash-free. So it was really powerful. They thought that was really cool. And warrants, we will typically utilize warrants as part of our structures, and that's where we work with our estate planning and wealth management folks to make sure that it's congruent with the plan that the seller has. But you can save 40% on estate taxes by being smart. And again, that's where my colleagues down in Columbus bring their talents to bear. All right, 1042, how does it work? It is a Internal Revenue Code section. You got to roll over the gain, and we'll just touch on that quickly. You don't have to, right? This is an option. Most of my clients do, but I always get the question, Shawn, should I do a 1042? Well, it depends on the size of the tax savings, right? If you save $5 million in taxes, I would think, yeah, that's it's worth it, right? If it's $5 million across 10 partners, probably not. The juice probably isn't worth the squeeze there, right? But you can sell it in a taxable sale, and some of my clients do. I don't necessarily understand it, but they're just like, look, I would have paid taxes if I had sold it to a third party. I love what I'm doing for my people, my community. I'm just going to pay the taxes and move on with my life, and you can certainly do that. But if you hold that QRP, the bad joke I tell folks is, look, I got good news and bad news. The good news is you can avoid capital gains entirely. The bad news is you got to die. So, which is true. But you hold those securities until your death, and your estate gets the step up in basis. For those math challenged like me, we put together a little slide here. So death and taxes are the only two things that you can't avoid, right? So you sell to a third party, you're going to pay 25% of the gain in Ohio, round numbers in taxes, so you net 75. With an ESOP, that math's easier for me. No capital gains taxes. You retain 100% of the sale proceeds. What that means is you've got to sell for about 33% more to achieve the same net after tax. So a 6 times ESOP deal, 6 times EBITDA ESOP deal, all things considered, equivalent to an 8 times third-party deal. And as the valuations increase, that delta increases as well. Typical debt structure at closing, actually fairly straightforward. Seller note is the majority of it. Again, if you assume senior debt represents about 30% of the value of the business, your seller note's about 70%. As I've said, typically 12%. It's going to be a mix of cash pay, current pay at about 4%, and the balance that whatever isn't paid in cash, you have 2 options. You defer that interest and catch up whenever you make a principal payment, or, and we think the smart play is to convert that to warrants. Warrants act as like a stock option, allows you to buy shares down the road. And the neat thing here with warrants are taxed at capital gains rates. So 20% federal. State capital gain and ordinary income are the same. But interest income is taxed at ordinary rates. So that's 37% federal. So you have a 17% tax arbitrage by utilizing warrants. So it's a smart play. And that's where, again, we try to get those out of their estate right away into trusts for kids, grandkids, charitable giving, whatever you want to do. Term loan, again, on market terms and conditions, typically a SOFR plus sort of model, 250 to 350. 5-year term, 5-year amortization. Sometimes we'll see a 7-year am. A very neat aspect of it, in most cases, there is no personal guarantee on this bank debt. Banks hate it, sellers love it, and I've had many clients who, one of the reasons they're thrilled to do an ESOP is they get out of their personal guarantee. They get away from the personal guarantee that they currently have with their bank. As some folks approach retirement and are getting older, that personal guarantee kind of looms over them, and it makes them nervous. They'd hate to get to 65 and lose it all if the company goes belly up because they have the personal guarantee. So no personal guarantees in the bank loan. And we'll always include a line of credit to make sure that the company has plenty of liquidity to support working capital. So fairly basic structure. This chart depicts the repayment of the debt over time. So it's a little busy, I know. The dark green, avocado green, I don't know, at the bottom represents the bank loan, the senior term loan. The lighter green, seafoam green on top is the seller note. And what you see is the payment over time, over the quarters on the senior debt. This assumes at the end of that first year a refinance of the bank debt. You use that extra cash to pay down the seller note. So you're paying that down in chunks over time. This shows it being paid off at the end of 4 years. Again, if the company misses projections or slightly lower, it would just push that out. Banks love it if you look at this, right? So they'd have a term loan that would pay off in 4 or 5 years, depending on cash flow, and you're done. Here, at the bank's comfort level, they'll do these refinances, but it takes a term loan that would be sort of a 5-year deal and extends it out, through 8 years. This bump here is a assumed refinance of the warrant exercised by the seller. Probably more details than you care, but banks love it because at their comfort level, they can refinance that senior piece. So it's, if you like Christmas vacation, it's the gift that keeps on giving all year long, Clark. And they like that. And the seller likes it because the seller note comes down over time. And what happens is many times, initially my clients, they've got the 70% seller note outstanding, and they're nervous. They're like, I want to get this repaid as quickly as possible, right? And they get a first refinance, maybe they get a second refinance, and then they realize how it's working. They realize they've got warrants on it, and they're earning interest. And then it's, hey, no rush to pay me off. Let's take our time. It flips, They're like, we're going to be gone. Why don't we talk after we get back from Europe? Eventually, the trustee's got to grab them by the neck and say, listen, I can refinance with bank debt, at 7%. I'm paying you 12%, so let's quit screwing around. This is a powerful slide. This is, I think, very instructive, important for clients to understand. So at closing, they're going to get a chunk of cash. That's that 30% that comes from the senior bank debt, right? And then each year, this dark green assumes a principal repayment on the seller note over time. The light green represents interest income. And then this is a warrant exercise in the 5th year. We're almost sort of fully paid by year 3. Year 4, we've got 100% plus of the original transaction value, and then we exercise the warrants the year after the seller note is paid. If the seller elects 1042 and is avoiding capital gains taxes, this cash and this principal repayment is tax-free. Does not pay capital gains on it. Interest income is always going to be taxed at ordinary rates. And then the warrant exercise is going to be capital gains treatment. So no tax, ordinary, and then capital gains. But the key here is to understand you're not getting all your cash at front. So that's one of the trade-offs. I've got a slide that speaks to that. But if you're comfortable with the business going forward, this is what it looks like. I had a company we closed, call it 3 years ago. They crushed it out of the gate. The owner actually stepped away, fell ill, was going to step away anyway. The management team that had been there for 30 years, the shackles were sort of off, and they got to sort of run the business, and they doubled EBITDA, and that seller note was paid off in 3 years. And we've also had seller notes that take a little longer, again, but you're earning 12% on that. It's important to know, though, you're not getting all that cash up front. Key considerations that you got to think about. So it's not an all-cash transaction, right? You're going to get about 30% of the value in cash at closing. So I talk to folks, what is your goal? Why are you pursuing a transaction today? Most of our clients, liquidity is great, but I really just want to get a succession plan in place. I want to get a transition plan and feel good. I want to take care of my employees. I want to preserve jobs in the community. And I don't need the cash. I mean, sure, it's great. I'll invest some. I'll play with some. But if maximizing cash at closing is a critical factor to the seller, ESOP's not the right answer, right? I'll happily sell you to a third party. We'll go out to private equity or strategic buyer, and you'll get a lot more cash. But as I think we all appreciate, our clients don't, but I think we do, that when you sell a business, if somebody tells you they're going to pay you $10 million, you're not going to get a wire for $10 million. It's 70% of that, it's maybe 80% of that, but there's going to be some level of rollover. There's going to be a seller note, perhaps an earnout. But regardless, you, in most cases, will achieve more cash at closing in a third-party sale. So if that's important, you want to buy the Cavs, you want to buy an island in the Caribbean, ESOP's probably not your path. The other notion that's critically important is you must be confident in the future prospects of the business. All right? Every business deals with threats and challenges and risks. We understand that. What I'm talking about is if there is a specific identifiable threat that keeps you up at night as an owner, whether it's the internet, Amazon, tariffs, China, pick your poison, don't do an ESOP, right? You need the ESOP to survive. You need that company to survive at a minimum long enough to pay off that seller note, right? So if there's this risk that could wipe out your business, don't do an ESOP. I'll happily sell you to private equity, let it be their problem. So it's the future earnings, of course, of that company that provide the majority of that 70% repayment on the seller note. Now, our clients that do ESOP, many are second, third, fourth generation family businesses that have been around for 50 or 100 years. And they've survived world wars and inflation and oil embargoes and COVID and the Great Recession and everything else, and they feel comfortable that the company will continue to thrive. So speaking to the service providers here, why should you guys care? Why is an ESOP an option you should think about? It certainly helps retain a client relationship, right? So what I tell folks is, if you're a service provider out there and you introduce me to a client and we get engaged and we're doing an ESOP for them, I can confidently guarantee two things. The first is we're going to kill it for your client. Truly, we're going to underpromise, we're going to overdeliver. It's a very controllable process. They are going to be ecstatic when that deal closes because everything we tell them up front, we're going to meet or exceed at closing. So they're going to be ecstatic. And number two, as a service provider, you're going to retain that client. People are like, I don't know, what do you mean? The question I ask is, if your client sells to private equity or a strategic, what happens to that client relationship? Yeah, right, okay. Not all the time, but it's usually a high, 6 times, 7, 8 out of 10 times, you lose that client relationship, right? In an ESOP transaction, it's half a time out of 10 that you would lose that client relationship. That owner selected you as their service provider for a reason. They trust you, they like you, you understand their business, your pricing is appropriate, you're fair to them, you're responsive. That's who they want after that transaction closes to support them. It's a great way to open doors with new prospective clients, again, by bringing some ideas that maybe their existing folks haven't. And you create value for them by introducing them to an alternative that many have negative perceptions of, and you sort of, educate and inform. So I would argue it can be a powerful exit strategy. It's not the right answer in every case, very dependent upon what the owner is trying to achieve. But for sellers' advantages, I think there's a host. Avoiding capital gains, right? We've talked about that. That's certainly a huge. You have the interest in warrants on the seller note. But as long as you're getting a fair price for that owner and they feel good about it, it's the ability to keep that company independent, to preserve the culture, the history of the company, and reward those employees. If you own the real estate in a separate LLC, they love having the company stay as a tenant. Third-party buyers will sign leases, certainly, but typically it's a shorter-term lease, and they want the flexibility to leave. And if you've got a unique building that may be tough to lease, you don't have that risk here. Diligence is much easier. It's highly confidential. You have one buyer. You have a very small, specialized team, so your information isn't out there for everybody to gobble up. As I said, the ESOP pays the closing costs. And many, again, dream of selling the company, transitioning it in some fashion to their employees. They'd love to sell it to the employees don't have the money to buy it. Hey, here's a way to bridge that gap. For the employees, by far the easiest way to become an owner, right? You just work there, and you get shares every year. Key employees, typically the senior management team, there are special key incentives for those folks. Again, I've said no investment, no cost, and no risk, no personal guarantees, and ultimately the potential to build significant retirement assets. As we know, nothing's guaranteed. I just read an article yesterday. Our marketing person in Columbus reposted an article from a local newspaper in Vermont where a company had established an ESOP, I think in 2001. They announced the sale for $1 billion to, it wasn't KKR, but it was a big New York private equity firm, creating hundreds of millionaires at the company. Now that's, a fantastic outcome. They're all not like that. Locally, I think we're familiar with the Garland companies. Many know the Garland companies on the east side. One fact about ESOPs, it is a qualified retirement plan. I've said that, right? Just like your 401k, an ESOP has to file a Form 5500 on an annual basis. So these are all public disclosures. It's just no information about the company, but information about the plan and the plan assets. So Garland's most recent 5500 filing was in October this past fall, based on 2023 numbers, because it was filed in 24. They had essentially round numbers, call it 1,000 active participants in the plan. They've got more employees, but 1,000 participants in the plan. Total plan assets. Now in a 401k plan, that's mutual funds, the stocks, bonds, et cetera. In an ESOP, your plan assets, for the most part, are simply company shares. Okay, 1,000 employees, round numbers. Total plan assets, $1.7 billion. Right? I did the math in my head. I went, that can't be right. So I got my phone out and I did every single digit because clearly I'm a moron. No, it's the same number. It's still $1.7 million. Powerful. That's an average account balance. Now, that includes somebody that's been there 3 months and somebody that's been there 30 years, so you've got a wide dispersion there, but powerful. Now, again, that is an outlier, but think of a client that has an employee that has $400,000 in their account. Their pay and benefits weren't altered while they're working, and when they retire, they get that incredible benefit. Ideal situations, because we get this question, right? What makes a good ESOP? So before I jump into the details, I like to explain it this way. If I talk to a client, I always ask them, how did you come to own the business? Sometimes it's obvious it's a family business, and But if they tell me, listen, I bought this business 30 years ago, right? I mortgaged my house, I emptied my 401k, I poured everything I had into the business, took the risk, and we've grown it really well over the last 30 years. And I'm 65, and I'm ready to go. Okay, great. Then to me, that says sell it to a third party, run an auction process, because never once did they talk about employees, legacy, culture, history, and there's no criticism and no judgment there. That's absolutely a fine course of action. They made a financial investment 30 years ago, and today it's time to reap the rewards. Okay, great. I'll run a process, and off he goes. The flip side of that coin is I'm talking to a husband and wife, and they're like, well, we're a third-generation family business. Grandma and Grandpa started it. Mom and Dad ran it. Now it's us. It's been a great business. We've grown it. We've been blessed, very successful. We got a great house here in Cleveland. Have a nice place down in Naples. You know, we ski out west a couple weeks a year. We've got a boat, country club, assets. Things are good. We're very blessed. It's also put our 3 kids through college, right? One is a hotshot M&A attorney in New York. One's a doctor in Chicago. One's an actress in LA. None of them want to come back to the Midwest and run mom and dad's stamping business, injection molding business, distribution, whatever it is, right? And mom and dad are happy because the kids are healthy, they're working hard, they're being successful, but there's this lament that, gosh, this company has become more than just a profit-generating enterprise. It is part of the fabric of our family's life. You know, pictures on the wall, the kids pushing brooms in the warehouse when they were 12, things like that, right? I had a client in North Canton who told me, he said, Shawn, my dad and uncle founded this business in 1947 in their garage. And we've grown and expanded and moved, and today we're in this 150,000 square foot facility. I've got 250 people out on the plant floor. And he said, easily, half of them or their parents have worked for my dad and my uncle, and now they're working for me. I've been to more weddings, funerals, high school graduations, baptisms for these folks than I can count. They're like family to me, and I want to take care of them. I want to reward them, and at a minimum, I want to preserve their jobs, because many folks recognize I sell to a third party, jobs are at risk. That client screams ESOP to me, all right? So let's talk about profiles, though. Typically an owner that's 55 or older. If they're much younger, they're probably not at an age where transition makes a lot of sense necessarily. No heir currently ready or capable or interested in taking over. Culture, history, legacy are important to those folks. Rewarding their people are important. Tax averse helps. We've all have clients and talk to clients that say, is that tax deductible? Can I deduct that? How do I avoid taxes? I tell folks, do not do an ESOP simply to avoid taxes. It's a benefit and it's an incentive, certainly. Don't do it solely for that reason, because it's not going to match your goals and you're not going to be happy. And again, maximizing cash at close is not the motivating factor. In an ESOP, we're going to be able to deliver about 30% of the value in cash at closing. So if 30 versus 50 versus 70 doesn't matter, ESOP can be great. But if you're trying to maximize cash at closing, don't do it. And fair market value is adequate. They're not that last dollar. If you need to squeeze every last dollar out of the sale so that you can sleep at night, then I'll run an auction and the market. Many cases, I can still deliver more than ESOP than that, but they want to know that they got every last dollar. Company profiles. So this was a question, Ben, what size? $2.5 million of EBITDA or more is a typical threshold. We've worked with smaller companies at times. You do need capable management post-sale. Most cases, it ends up being, the seller himself, the client. But I've had many clients step away. They had already hired a president, and they had a longtime CFO running the business. And I think this is true of a sale to a third party as well. In most cases, if private equity is buying your business, they want you around because they're not going to run it. They want you running it until they replace you 6 months later, but that's a separate story. You need the future prospects to be solid, right? It's got to be, turnarounds don't work. You want cash flowing businesses. And adequate borrowing capacity. If they're fully levered, I mean, you can still certainly do an ESOP, but all you're going to do is swap a new ESOP loan for the existing loan and not create much cash for the shareholders or the sellers at closing. So that's something to think about. And then industries, we always get that question. Obviously, unique niche companies where there aren't any natural synergistic buyers, can make great ESOPs. About 30% of our business firm-wide is represented by contractors and construction firms. So ESOPs can pay very, very competitive prices to anything that they would get in a third party. They have a seller note versus any sort of earn-out, so they don't have to fight about it. And in many cases, it's the name of the family is part of the company. It's preserving the culture and protect the jobs of those folks. I think I mentioned my colleague in Dallas sold his $800 million deal was a mechanical contractor down in Dallas. White collar professional firms, right? So you think engineers, architects, consulting firms, those can make great ESOPs. And frankly, if you think about it, both contractors and even the white collar firms, similar in that the value of the business is really driven by the people, right? Construction firms, you've got skilled labor, operating machines, doing this and that. Architectural engineering, you've got the professionals, providing those services. When you buy either of those two firms as a third-party buyer, you're buying the people, you're buying a backlog, and a goodwill, brand name kind of thing. So an ESOP is very good at supporting those goals in those industries. And then broadly, traditional manufacturing distribution companies, small towns, companies in small towns can be a good fit. And again, preserving that legacy, reputation, and culture. And then finally, I call it corporate divorces. It comes in various flavors, but you're a third generation family business, and now you've got cousins, and half are in the business and half aren't, and they're suing each other, and these guys want distributions, and these guys want to reinvest, and it can get messy and sticky. You can do an ESOP and take out one side of the family or those that want to leave and replace those folks, get them liquid by an ESOP, right? So you can do an ESOP for 50%. The other is active versus inactive, another way to look at it. And the ability to replace one shareholder with another. So sometimes you'll have age disparities. You'll have two partners, one's 70, one's 50. 70 would like to retire, 50 would like to run hard for another 5 or 10 years. But the 70-year-old doesn't want to stick the 50-year-old with some rando partner or sell to private equity and have that 50-year-old have to deal with this unknown. You can bring in an ESOP and have them buy out the 70-year-old. So a lot of different ways to approach it. Thank you. You survived ESOP 101. It's my contact info. And it's not true until I give you the disclaimer. Nothing I told you can be relied upon as fact. I don't know. And questions? You guys have been great. Matthew.
Shawn, excellent presentation.
Oh, stop. You're making me blush.
You mentioned Garland, so could you just address the ability of a company that's gone through an ESOP to continue to grow directly?
Oh, yeah, right. No, it's a great story. So for those that don't know, Garland is a 125-year-old company, some three-digit number. They've been in ESOP since 1985. We did not do it, unfortunately, because that would be a great success story to tell. Long-time ESOP, and Matthew's right. Once you, as an ESOP company, pay down that acquisition debt, you saw that chart I had, you don't have any debt, and you're minting cash because you're not paying taxes on that cash flow. What do? In Garland's case, they've been highly acquisitive, right? They have made a number of very successful acquisitions, grown that company tremendously, and it creates value for everybody. And the wonderful thing about an ESOP as an acquisition candidate, two things. One, just from a financial perspective, you buy that company, their cash flows, they come under the umbrella of the ESOP, their cash flows become tax-free too. So you are a strategic buyer on steroids, right? Because you can go head-to-head with any other strategic buyer in your industry for that person, because you can cut the same costs as they can. But when you buy it, their cash flows become tax-free. The other strategics don't have that benefit. So that's huge, that's powerful, right? The other is, typically, ESOP companies are going to have great, positive, supportive, collaborative cultures. So you can be perceived as the white knight buyer. You know, you got a contentious battle going on with somebody that wants to buy you. You don't want to sell to them because they're jerks and they're not nice. They don't have a good culture. And ESOP, again, paying very competitive or probably the highest price, and typically a great culture where when the employees come under that umbrella, they become participants in the ESOP as well. So if you're able to communicate all those, it really allows you to be a very successfully acquisitive company. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Sure. Have you seen companies using ESOP as a growth strategy as opposed to just an exit?
So interesting. What I would tell you is, yes, down the road, from an acquisition standpoint, one of the important things to understand is out of the gate, it's tough to make acquisitions or to grow aggressively because you're fully burdened with all that debt, right? Because if you've got a $10 million value business, you've got, call it $3 million from a bank and a $7 million seller note. So arguably, you're fully levered, 100% levered transaction, which is why some banks, oh, good Lord, I can't do that. That's, what are you doing? It makes it hard to make acquisitions right out of the gate. Now, as you pay that debt down very quickly and grow, it can be. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Shawn, when does the business owner typically engage you and your team, or is it one of the primary advice givers when they're starting to explore the ESOP? Is it, a year in advance for when they're trying to start making that exit?
Like anything, clearly earlier the better to have those conversations. I think like any sale, it's a lot of emotion, right? And so to get comfortable, to come up to speed, I just got engaged this week on a wonderful company here in town. I've been talking to them for 5 years. They just weren't ready. They had an off year. They put things off. And great, I'm not here to pressure folks. I'm here to educate, to inform. And I will tell you, my biggest challenge is attorneys and accountants who don't fully appreciate ESOPs or how they work or where and when they work. And their client comes to them and they say, hey, Bob at the club said I should think about an ESOP. What do you think? And the advisor, being truthful, says, you don't want to do that. It's too complicated. It costs too much. All these sort of red flags because it's what they believe, right? They may have been a young associate at a law firm or an accounting firm 30 years ago and saw a dumpster fire of an ESOP deal getting done. And they're like, who in the heck would ever want to do that? That looks awful. And the sad truth is there were a lot of just really awful deals done historically. And you can go back to Continental Airlines, or United Airlines, I believe, was an ESOP at one point, Weirton Steel. There were all these companies that were tanking. Unionized, relying on commodity prices for fuel and steel. Companies falling off the cliff, and they're like, man, we're going to have to file bankruptcy. Or, maybe we do this ESOP thing, and maybe tax-free will get us out. So they did it, and it helped for a couple of years, but then it crashed and burned. Everybody's like, ESOPs suck. Well, no, the company sucked. The structure was awful. And so people carry that memory, if you will, or that single data point. If they know about Garland, they're like, yeah, ESOPs are the best thing in the world. And the truth is certainly somewhere in between. In the right situation, they can be really good. But early discussions to help them overcome, because I think a lot of folks just think, look, if I sell to private equity, that's the ultimate validation of my business and my career, because private equity wants me, right? I'm the shit. And some folks ultimately, I think, realize that's not the right path for them. It's a great path for a whole bunch of folks, but not for me. So earlier the better is Yes, sir.
So this QRP, does it affect contribution limits for the other employees as they try to fund retirement plans?
QRP does not, no.
So I mean, so they're getting their shares, the value of the shares doesn't come off of their retirement plans?
No, no, no. You're,
What is, as they receive, as it's paid out, do they roll it into something? Or do they tax it?
so great question. As I said, it's very similar to 401k. So ESOP distributions are subject to the same rules that your 401k is. So if you're of retirement age, you can roll it to an IRA. If your plan, an ESOP doesn't allow you to stick around, but if you can roll it to an employer's plan, you can do that as well. The smart move, if you're not taking the distribution, roll it. Don't take a distribution because then you're going to pay your taxes. If you withdraw it early, same thing. You're going to pay a 10% penalty, right, and then your current tax rate.
But it's treated like a traditional
Yeah.
rollover IRA?
Absolutely, yes. Roll it into that, and then take distributions as needed. And then you have the RMD rules when you're 70. Yeah, Joe.
Shawn, what happens, this might be a dumb question, but if it's a minority-owned business?
Yep.
And the 52% minority owner steps away?
Yep.
Is it now non-minority? Well, let's say he stays.
Sure. So it depends. I've got a lot of accounting friends or economists. It depends. The answer, we did a deal down in Columbus 2 years ago. It was a woman-owned, certified woman-owned business. The president happens to be a woman, and we brought in a female trustee. And for that certification agency or group, whoever stamped them, WBE, it met their criteria. So it remains a WBE certified ESOP business because the president and the trustee are both women. But it ultimately comes down to whoever is certifying, they have to, yeah. Sure. Yes, sir, Howard.
You know, there's a life cycle of an owner of a business
Mm-hmm.
in terms of when he starts to think about selling to where he works his way all the way to the finish line.
Right.
Which may be, his family may be the finish line if he dies. But does the ESOP provide a guy, somebody who starts thinking about selling with an earlier option to cash out but still stay active with the business? In other words, do you find that somebody may jump on the ESOP strategy 4 or 5 years earlier than he would with another liquidation event strategy?
Absolutely, you can because it's a very friendly, and again, I tell people, you close an ESOP transaction on a Friday and you come in on Monday, you know, and you're looking around like, okay, guess it's the same, right? Nothing changes. And so some like that notion. Others struggle with, we've all had clients like this, others have struggled with the notion that, gosh, things are really looking good. You know, I'm gonna be worth more next year, so I'm gonna put that off. And the challenge you face, and I'm not trying to push anybody towards a transaction or not, but if you believe that, then this conundrum will always be true. You will be worth more tomorrow than you are today. And then tomorrow, you'll be worth more the next day than you are then. So the question becomes, when do I exit? When is the right time? Many take some comfort, though, in, look, I've grown it to a point where I've got a great value. I have the ability to lock in, you know, this value for my family. I want to be there for another couple of years, so I'm going to work that seller note down, and I'm going to be, you know, sort of driving the bus. So that timing works for me. And others just want to know that, well, I'm going to put it off for a couple more years. Now, what I'll tell folks is, I did a deal down in Columbus 2 years ago. It was a $125 million exit. He made a 1042 election and avoided $32 million of capital gains taxes. So he had a huge benefit there. He also got warrants as part of that seller note for 23% of the company. So he got paid a full 100% value for the business today. He's continuing to work there and draw salary, you know, benefits and all, and bonus and all that. And he's got warrants for 23% of the company. So that company is killing it. I don't know. Those warrants are going to be worth $40, $50 million. So there are different ways to, it just comes down to, ultimately, like anything, is what's important to them. Are they trying to lock it in today and know what their number is, or are they going to be chasing a value? every year. But you can do it and nothing changes, and some people really like that, the ability to have something in place and continue to run the business, without influence. Uh-oh.
Okay, one more question. Do we have another question or no? Okay, well, let's have a round of applause for Shawn.
Thank you, Ben.